Hello, Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to Movie Markers Awards discussion. It's about the films in 2024 that caught the eye of voters both in the critics' circles and in the various academies. My name is Rehna, and I'm the awards editor at Movie Marker. And we have a fabulous team writing for us, and some of them are on our panel today. We've got Latoya Austin. Hi, Latoya. We've got Chris Connor. Hello, Chris. And we were going to have Clotilde, but sadly she's been held up with London traffic, and she may join us later. And making a special appearance on today's presentation is our editor, Darryl Griffiths. Darryl's been in the role of editor for a year now, and the site is really going places under his leadership, and he'll tell us a little bit about that shortly. But the format of this evening is that each of us will have particular categories that we discuss, and there will also be group discussions about general subjects around awards season. So before I come to the awards, I'd like to come to you, Darryl. You became editor a year ago, and I just want to get an overview from you as to what Movie Marker is all about, where you think we're going in 2025, and what your hopes and aspirations are.
Right. So to start off, belated Happy New Year to everybody who might end up watching this, and obviously to my fellow team members. So Movie Marker, obviously, and just to relay what Rehna said, we've been in the role for a little over 12 months now. To encapsulate how 2024 went, the big news that we had was become an official media partner of a Cardiff-based LGBTQ+ film festival called Aries Prize, and they offer the largest short film prize in the world of £30,000, if I remember correctly. So that alone is a massive deal for us as a website, and boosting our credibility and supporting and amplifying voices that perhaps don't always get a look in through film journalism and just the industry at large. Movie Marker has always been devoted to supporting independent film as a whole, whether it's independent cinemas or independent filmmakers. That's sort of the core values that we've always had, and we've seen many a filmmaker sort of reach out to us, and they've gone on to do great things over the last probably decade that Movie Marker has been going, and that's testament to hopefully us as a team in terms of keen eye for talents, but also just the collective efforts that we all put in, and obviously intertwining that with the filmmakers as well. So it's a team effort at the end of the day, and that's what it always boils down to. Going into 2025, I really want to put more emphasis again on supporting filmmakers who are, putting probably their first short film together, and we're getting a lot of traction through that over Christmas and New Year, just judging how much I'm working through my emails at the moment. So that is really encouraging, and just supporting, particularly at the moment, independent cinemas, and trying to just raise their national profile and really reinforce why they are so vital to the ecology of getting films out there, especially independent film in this country. So I'll zip for now, and I'll lay it over to you guys.
Great, thank you. That's really, really interesting. Thanks, Darryl. So moving on to our awards discussion, we're in the middle of awards season, and it seems to me, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but the awards season gets longer and longer each year. And I'm an awards junkie, so I admit that straight away. But come Oscars time, even I'm exhausted by covering all the events and the winners and the fashion and the red carpets and everything. And I can't imagine how intense it is for the actors and the filmmakers, because even this morning I was looking on the internet, and they were going to brunches and lunches and dinners and galas and this red carpet and that red carpet. So I just wanted to know what you guys felt about whether there are too many awards events, and whether, well, what we can do about that. I mean, do we cut out things? I mean, how do we get around that? Or do you love it all? So starting with you, Latoya.
Well, I don't think that we should cut it out completely. It does always tend to be quite a busy time. So once you've had the culmination of the autumn film festival season, and you're usually straight into award season. And for me, being a voter on various critics guilds and the Golden Globes as well, it can be exceedingly busy. So there will be a lot of films to watch as being a member of those various circles, and just a lot of activity around that time. But it is a celebration essentially, so it's really quite good having that opportunity for those films that we've watched throughout the year to be celebrated effectively.
Chris?
Hi everyone. It goes on for what does feel like a long time, I think. And you kind of kick it off, as you said, with the festival circuit, which have their own awards element. You know, they always vote for the best films at the festivals. So I think effectively it's what, a 4 or 5 month stretch, isn't it, really? But a lot of these small festivals do some really good work highlighting local films and more independent films. So I'm not entirely sure if chopping any out would achieve much, because you'd be losing a voice. I guess you can maybe streamline them to make them a bit shorter, but I don't know. Again, there's so many awards that's quite hard to do as well. So it's kind of an awkward one, isn't it, really?
Darryl, do you love award season or not?
I think along with you guys, I think it's become so maximalist now, but I think that's just Hollywood at large. Again, we could really go off on a tangent about all that. I think similar to Chris, I think trying to streamline them, it's a dangerous game, because I think you are sort of, potentially alienating a lot of voices that perhaps wouldn't necessarily get a look in. And just judging sort of the ones that are on the fringes this year, you look at like the likes of All We Imagine As Light is one that immediately springs to mind, given the success and history-making success it had at Cannes. Like voices like that would get probably potentially shut out if we streamlined or cut out festivals altogether. So I think there's pros and cons to both, really, I'm afraid. So we've just got to sort of live with it.
Okay. Now, moving on to our particular list, we're going to be looking at the main awards, the ones that the public really are interested in. And Latoya, I'm going to come to you first of all with Best Lead Actress, which is a very interesting group this year, I think.
I would agree. So I think this year there are some very strong contenders. We've had very strong films this year overall, and quite wide-ranging films as well. So it's been great to see some of the older actresses having really quite prominent parts, significant roles, and also independent films. I think we're also seeing some of those have a look in as well. So within those, you then have some really good performances. Unfortunately, not all of them will receive nominations, but at least there is that opportunity for their films to be seen and discussed as well. I mean, this year, amongst your main contenders, you do have people such as Mickey Madison for Anora. That's been a performance a lot of people have been talking about, really a breakthrough performance for her, her first lead role effectively. People may remember her from Scream and various other films where she's had a supporting role, and here she's really had her moment to shine within this film. So I think that she has been amongst the top 5, top 10 in many lists for nominations or long lists, and I think she'll be a name that we will continue to see in a lot of these lists as well. Another person that I think we certainly will be seeing is Cynthia Erivo. Her performance in Wicked is just so emotive. Her singing is stellar. Her and her co-star Ariana Grande, they were singing live. There's a really good chemistry between them, and I think that her performance has been one that has resonated with a lot of people. The musical itself is loved by so many, and this is such a faithful adaptation whilst also delivering so much more substance, and Cynthia really manages to bring all of that out, bring it out to the fore, captivate so many. So I think that she is another one that we will see on a lot of lists as well. I know that Emilia Perez as a film has been receiving a lot of conversation just in terms of how audacious it is as a film by Jacques Audiard, a French film director that many know, but this is something that's perhaps unprecedented, having a musical of this type. So a lot of people are talking about that, and particularly the actresses within that. So we have seen in some ceremonies that all 4 of the actresses have been awarded. At the moment, I think that the lead actress, Carla Sofia Gascon, will be one that is noted for a lot of lists, and just in terms of the topics in the film as well, covering the trans narrative. So I think that we will also continue to see her on many lists as well. Demi Moore, I should mention, again, an actress who, I don't know if we'll say it's a comeback role, but is really there in this role that is so full of life and angst, and so many women can just resonate with it completely, and just goes through that whole women experience and your feelings of anxiety and uncertainty about your body. Some people describe it as a body horror, but it's not quite. It's more to do with being a woman and how society perceives you, and being an older woman at that, and having that younger rival who's almost meant to be someone who's grateful to you. So there's a lot of all about Eve in it, but yes, I think her performance is one that we're going to continue seeing on a lot of these lists as well. I know that Marianne Jean-Baptiste has been mentioned for some nominations, and she's just formidable in Hard Truths. I think it would be great to see her on several other nominations to come, as she just plays this role of a woman who's very difficult to understand, difficult to love, but she does it with such relish and a tour de force, and it's just cantankerous from start to finish. But you eventually understand that there are some really quite difficult childhood memories, and the dynamics are quite difficult, but her performance is one that I think is just highly remarkable and noted, and will continue to appear on a lot of lists. I think, unfortunately, even though Angelina Jolie has been named with some, I think that her performance may be one that does end up being missed out. There doesn't seem to be as many people talking about her performance in Maria, unfortunately. So whilst she is effectively in one of the roles of her life, performing extremely well as Maria Callas, she did actually take singing lessons, learning how to perform as this operatic singer, but I think unfortunately it may be one that's overlooked for some of the performances that I have already mentioned. But again, I think it's a very, very strong race. I think unfortunately Circe as well is probably going to be overlooked. She in the outrun is just incredible. It's just such an energetic, dynamic performance, just so raw, so much emotion in there. But unfortunately, I think that may be one that's also missed out.
Thanks, Latoya. Darryl, I sent you an article a couple of days ago about the male and female lead roles. And in that, I put Demi Moore down as getting that 5th slot, almost as if it was, they want her in because, as Latoya says, it's a bit of a comeback. But now I'm hearing that she could win. So it's between her and Mickey Madison. So I'm pleased for her, very pleased for her. Any thoughts, Chris and Darryl, about that?
Do you want to go first, Darryl?
Yeah, sure. With Demi Moore, I mean, just the substance as a whole. I mean, although it's not necessarily defined completely by the body horror aspects of it. I think just to champion a film that's as close to horror as we've had in an awards conversation finally is great, because there's been so many like near misses in recent years. Toni Collette from Hereditary immediately springs to mind. So the fact that the genre is actually getting recognised and getting this kind of attention again, for probably the first time in a long time, is terrific. And on the subjects, slightly going off on a tangent, in the musical as well, I think Wicked with Cynthia Erivo, because I think through a lot of marketing campaigns recently, musicals, they try to hide the fact that they're musicals, which I find very bizarre. But the fact that it's like unapologetic and, you know, getting this kind of attention, and deservedly so, like Latoya said, it's so faithful, and Cynthia Erivo does a lot of the emotional heavy lifting within it, and it's just, especially the last 20 minutes with, you know, that defying gravity moment, it was like all the goosebumps and hairs on the neck standing to attention. But bringing it back to Demi and Mickey Madison, I mean, Mickey Madison again, like, you know, to have this huge breakthrough moment with Honora, and again, given what Honora deals with, and, you know, trying to destigmatize sex workers, again, you know, it's another wonderful film, and I'm, you know, more power in terms of, you know, removing the negative sort of, you know, and the stigma towards that. I think, like you say, Rehna, I think it is a bit of a toss-up between those two at the moment. I think either way, I think to recognise Demi for all, you know, it does feel like in one sense, you know, it would be more like sort of a legend sort of giving of the, you know, the big awards, which we shouldn't really, because, you know, how transformative her performance is in The Substance, you know, can't be, you know, just disregarded. But at the same time, recognising this breakout star of Mickey Madison. I mean, I watched her Actors on Actors with Pamela Anderson a couple of years ago. If you haven't seen it, just to branch it out outside of the team, if you haven't seen that, just the presence that they both have and how they, you know, given the sort of similarities, really, given what Honora deals with and what Pamela Anderson's gone through throughout her career, you know, it's fascinating to see how they bounce off each other. So yeah, I can't really see beyond either of those two. And bringing it back to Cynthia Erivo, I think because there's a part 2 coming,
yes,
it feels like there's more emphasis on Ariana Grande, judging the general conversations that I'm having as well, and I'm sure you guys might recognise that. And I feel like, given there's a part 2, maybe Cynthia further down the line, if part 2 goes well, may get a look in like at a later date.
And Chris, your thoughts on the women's race?
The only person I'm not sure if you may have mentioned her was Nicole Kidman. I don't know if we mentioned her yet, because she's been winning a lot of early awards. So I think the two Darryl mentioned, yes, and then I'd maybe add her as a third potential, because she won at Venice, I think, Best Actress.
Yes, she did.
And she's obviously an Oscar winner and had, I don't know off the top of my head, 5 or 6 nominations previously. So I think she'd certainly, and again, she's you know, an actress making a comeback, I guess, in the awards stage. I can't remember the last time she had an Oscar nomination. So
I'm going to bring up Kate Winslet, who is a veteran, much loved. And I have friends in Hollywood, and I've been asking them, you know, who are you hearing buzz about? And they said there's so much love for her in a film's lead, which really wasn't seen by many people. But I think her background, her career, the fact she's so popular, I would not be surprised if she is in the top 5 come Oscar time. I don't know, Latoya, whether you have a view on that.
I think there certainly has been a lot of discussion about Lee, given the subject, and obviously you have a female war photographer there. So I think a lot of people are saying that it's a great performance. I don't know if it will be overshadowed perhaps by Mickey and Demi, but I think there certainly has been a lot of discussion about it.
Moving on from Best Actress to Best Actor, that was going to be Clotilde's discussion. So I'm going to throw out some names to you guys to let me know what you think. Ralph Fiennes for Conclave seems to me a certainty for an Oscar nomination. Daniel Craig for Queer, Coleman Domingo for Sing Sing, Adrian Brody for The Brutalist.
Yeah.
And then number 5 is, I think, possibly up for grabs, maybe not. What do you guys think? Chris, starting with you.
Do you think Daniel Craig is a certainty? Because I've seen him a few weeks ago was out of the conversation completely.
Okay.
I'm trying to think off the top of my head who else would be. So you've got Peter Sarsgaard maybe for September 5th. There's
I think
a
Sebastian Stan as well.
Sebastian Stan twice potentially, depending on which film they're pushing harder for him. Obviously, he might be a bit controversial with The Apprentice. So maybe A Different Man would be the one he would get a nomination for. Chalamet, I think, is a nailed on
Yes.
certainty
Oh, yeah,
for a
he's
not
great.
Complete unknown, yes.
for a nom. I don't know about winning. So probably someone in that set, I guess, plus the ones you mentioned. Ray
Timothy
Fiennes, I
Chalamet.
think,
Yeah.
meets the overdue narrative which we have every season. Daryl kind of mentioned. It's been 30 plus years maybe since he was last nominated, or for the English Patient, I think, because he was overlooked for the Grand Budapest. So he's certainly got that, long history with the awards and never quite won anything. So I don't know if, and Conclave is by one of his best performances, I think, as well. So it'd be quite a worthy one for him to finally win for.
And Daryl, much as I love Timothy Chalamet, I do think it should be Ray Fiennes' year. It's not just The English Patient, but Schindler's List, for which he lost the Best Supporting Actor Oscar.
Yeah.
And a lot of people feel that that's often on lists of mistakes that Oscar made. So, Daryl, I don't know what you think. Sorry, Latoya, I will come back to you in a moment.
I think Ray Fiennes is nailed on, definitely for a nomination. Again, I think given the names that are bandied around, I think the fifth slots, again, it seems quite straightforward this year, I feel like, with Best Actor. I think actress has got a little bit more sort of leeway in terms of potential surprises. But I think the actors, I think the names you've mentioned, I think it will be Brody, Domingo, Craig, Chalamet and Fiennes. I can't really see beyond those five. In truth, to break down each one, I think Chalamet, I haven't seen A Complete Unknown yet. I know some of you guys may have already. I think it might be a case of I'm sure the performance will be fine. I have a lot of love for Chalamet. I think given the director, James Mangold, and given what he achieved with Walk the Line, there might be not that we want to get into a compare and contrast situation, but I do feel like that might be a case of diminishing returns a little bit, given the names that are involved with Chalamet in that project. Again, The Brutalist, I haven't seen. I know Chris has seen it as well. I'm not sure whether Rehna and Latoya have. So obviously Chris could probably elaborate on Brody's performance. Fiennes, again, I really enjoyed his performance. I was sort of more drawn towards more of the supporting players personally. Like Stanley Tucci and the like. But again, I can see why voters would plump for Ray Fiennes in this particular year. I was personally more emotionally sort of connected to Domingo's performance in Sing Sing. I think just the whole narrative of that film in terms of, rehabilitation through the arts, it was so beautifully nuanced. And then Daniel Craig in Queer, which I think it's had quite polarizing reactions to it. Personally, I was really sort of drawn in by the whole narrative and the whole synchronicity of love and the tragedy of it. And that sort of that whole awkwardness that he really inhabits within that role. I just think it's, one of his best performances that he's ever given personally, with Daniel Craig. But yeah, in terms of the whole, the five picked, I think it will be those five that I've mentioned and what you guys have elaborated towards.
Latoya?
I was just going to say, as an outside option, it would be quite good seeing Glenn Powell in there for Hitman.
Interesting choice, yeah.
Or Hugh Grant for Heretic as well.
I've seen him nominated for a few.
Yeah, he's on the long list at BAFTA,
Yes.
I believe. I wouldn't be shocked if BAFTA do throw a curveball with that one, given the sort of trajectory he's on as well, given the roles he's been taking on. That wouldn't shock me, actually.
And Chris, coming to Best Supporting Actor, so your thoughts on that group, please?
Well, I think that is a really fascinating race so far because, just to run through who I think the leading contenders are, we've got Yura, I don't know, forgive me if I get the pronunciation slightly wrong here, Borisov for Honora, Kieran Culkin, who's been winning a lot of things so far alongside Guy Pearce. So those two seem to be the early frontrunners. So Kieran Culkin for A Real Pain, and Guy Pearce for The Brutalist, and then Jeremy Strong for The Apprentice, which seems to have kind of come alive his chances recently. He's been getting a few more nominations. and then Denzel Washington for Gladiator 2, and Edward Norton for A Complete Unknown. So yeah, I think Guy Pearce again has that long, been snubbed previously for things like LA Confidential, Memento, and what have you. And I think, obviously, I've seen The Brutalist. I think this is some of his best work by a long way. It's kind of, or at least since his very early work with LA Confidential and alike. And it's a very different performance to Kieran Culkin, which is more kind of comedic. And people have said maybe Culkin's actually the lead in A Real Pain. So there's a case of like, is he in the right category? Because I think it is very much a two-hand with him and Jesse Eisenberg in A Real Pain, and they probably have about the same amount of screen time. But they've put him in supporting, and he is winning a lot so far. So we might have a better idea after the Globes which of those two is going to be different.
I
don't know
think
if anyone else has any thoughts.
I think, Chris, that I would love to see Guy Pearce win because he's done so much good work. But again, as Darryl said earlier, it's a career overview rather than necessarily for that one performance. Personally, I think Jeremy Strong in The Apprentice blew me away, his performance, because he is this obnoxious, unlikable man at the beginning, and then at the end he pulls it back, and the pathos with which he deals with his diagnosis, I thought was absolutely wonderful. So for me, it's a blistering performance. I'd love him to get it, but I don't think he will win. I hope he gets nominated. Latoya?
Yeah, so I think, well, Denzel's always a good contender. So in Gladiator 2, his performance is one that's quite villainous, but also humoristic as well. And he plays that quite well. I think just talking about Kieran Culkin, I think that, yes, he probably is quite strong in the discussions with that. In the film, I do think that he is portraying an equal role as opposed to a supporting role. And it's one of those performances where it's extremely good, but he's also playing an extremely annoying character. So
Did you think he was too similar to his Succession role as well? Because I think that's a criticism of this performance.
I haven't watched
I've seen.
Succession. I haven't watched Succession.
I've watched. He is playing someone similar. Well, so not in the same circumstances, but the behavior of the characters is quite similar.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that will kind of hurt him in the long run, maybe.
Darryl, any thoughts on?
Yeah, that's my only concern, because Kieran Culkin would probably be my pick personally, but again, that's only because judging off what I've seen so far, obviously I could easily switch to Guy Pearce once I've seen The Brutalist in a couple of weeks' time. But yeah, I think that's the only drawback for Kieran Culkin. I was, very much impressed by his performance in Real Pain as a whole. I think it's a really terrific piece of work. I feel like people are sort of playing it down a lot. I think there's a lot more sort of substance to it than people have probably let on during awards season, particularly the turns it does take in the second half. But yeah, I think because of his Succession persona and how sort of, and obviously all the success that sort of drawn upon it over the years, I think that's a potential drawback in terms of people plumping for him this year. In terms of other names, one immediately springs to mind is Clarence Macklin from Sing Sing. I think he's a tremendous foil for Coleman. Whilst not necessarily winning it, I think he could potentially sneak in as a nomination as well, particularly as we go into like the BAFTA and the Oscars, sort of the latter end of the award season. But yeah, I think in terms of other names, it's Yuri Borisov for Anora again. It's another wonderful breakthrough, and then Denzel chewing up the scenery. But again, it feels like sort of the Meryl Streep, but the male sense. I think it's just a case of the prestige that Denzel has. It was sort of a given he was going to get nominated, and he's easily the standout in Gladiator 2. Yeah, I can see why.
Yeah, I would certainly recommend watching The Brutalist to see Guy Pearce's performance. He is
terrific in it.
He's incredible in that film.
Before we come back to the lists, I wanted to ask a general question, guys. The TV ratings for awards events have gone down in recent years. Last year, I think, was okay, but for the past sort of 4 or 5 years, particularly with the Oscars and the Golden Globes and the Grammys in the music world as well, how can these ceremonies be improved? Is there anything that you think they could cut out. I mean, my bugbear, for example, is I don't like when they mix the TV and the film categories, because it makes the show so long, and it just becomes too much. So that's one thing I would do. And in the Oscars, I would cut, I mean, this may sound awful, but I would cut out things like the short film awards. I don't think, other than the people involved, I don't think the public in general really cares. And some of the technical categories, I think, could be moved to another event. And finally, I know the Oscars did try to cut down on the thank yous to industry people, but people still ignore them, and it's just not interesting for viewers. I love it when they thank their mums. I love it when they thank their, teacher from 50 years ago. But when they thank Uncle Tom Cobley and all from within the industry who I've never heard of, it bores me. So those are my thoughts. What do you guys think?
I do think that the ceremonies are too long. So perhaps either deciding to separate your categories, so you could have one ceremony for film, one ceremony for TV, another one for short film, and have them at different times of the year. That might help with that. I think that because, yes, a lot of these ceremonies are in person, so they are actually just trying to create as much atmosphere as they can within that particular event for all concerned, those that have been invited and those that are watching it live. But I think for the viewing public that they are too lengthy. Do you think that it's a 3 or 4 hour ceremony, and quite often you are just going to be hearing long lists of thank yous, then it's not as entertaining. I think the times when there were shows that didn't have a host, those seemed to run a lot smoother and were quicker, and actually just had the awards announced and that was it. And quite often people just want to see the announcements, and maybe you could have a section beforehand where people are either milling around and taking the photos, and you have that beforehand as you have the red carpet, and then just go straight into the awards. And if you want to have some entertainment and performances, also do that, a bit like a TV chat show. So mix that up a bit. But I think 3 or 4 hours for a ceremony is just too long in one occasion.
Chris?
You could maybe cut down on the ad breaks, because I know after I don't know how often they do it, but every other award there's an ad break or something like that.
Yeah.
And I know they tried giving out awards during ad breaks, which was obviously controversial. I think last year there was quite a big hike in viewers because of the Barbenheimer, so people would actually have seen. I think sometimes people feel like they haven't seen the films that are nominated. And I don't know if that this year, I don't see Wicked maybe, but there's not many that are going to be like real. June, I suppose. So there might be more this year as well, for Wicked and for June, if those are nominated. But I think that is a big issue, is if people haven't seen the films, why would they care about the awards? Whereas you go back to the past and things like The Godfather were the biggest films of those year and then won the awards, and Lord of the Rings the same. So I don't know if that's something they need to look at, is the makeup of the films that are winning or being nominated.
That's a really good point, Chris, because the biggest audience the Oscars have ever had was for Titanic. And that makes sense because it was the biggest film ever for a very long time. Darryl, any advice you'd give to these ceremonies?
Yeah, I think similar to what Chris was saying. I think because, we were referring to like awards fatigue earlier on. I think because of the nature of how UK just and the state of UK distribution, a lot of these films generally are like the tail end of beyond the BAFTAs, or even sometimes beyond the Oscars, of when they actually get released over here. So I think because there's no real momentum to it a lot of the time for a lot of these releases. So again, public interest is, rock bottom in a few cases. So again, the makeup of the films, Wicked, Dune, I'm just trying to think of the list that we've got here. And just because of the way audiences, how we consume everything now, it's so short form. So having a complete extremity of, like a 3-4 hour ceremony is quite difficult. I think similar to what Latoya said, I think maybe breaking it up into two halves, maybe one on a Saturday night, one on a Sunday night, maybe devote more towards the behind the scenes stuff on a Saturday, and then more towards what's actually on screen on the Sunday. Might be a way around it. And I think not necessarily having a host all the time. I think because there's an obligation to, you know, throw add-ons upon the runtime in terms of doing skits and all that kind of stuff. And I think especially when we were in lockdowns, I think they were just a lot tighter and you felt sort of more engaged with it as a result. So I think that was my 2 cents on it anyway.
Okay. So back to our final 3 lists. Latoya, starting with you. Best Supporting Actress, again, a very competitive group this year.
Absolutely. And it could go, you know, in several directions with this one. I think there aren't really clear runners. There are a few that have been receiving nominations in other awards already. But again, it could go either way. And I think there will be some who unfortunately will miss out, even though their performance has been quite strong. But certainly at the moment, as we've mentioned already with Wicked, Ariana Grande is receiving a lot of discussion for her role. And she actually did become a soprano to play the role of Glinda. So there's a lot of dedication and commitment within this role. And she has surprised a lot of people with her performance and choreography. And so I think she's certainly one that we'll probably expect to see in future lists of nominees. Also, I think that probably Margaret Qualley in The Substance, she's another one. I think certainly appearing on a lot of lists and certainly performed really well against Demi Moore. So she certainly embodied that role of an ambitious younger person who is looking up to an older person, but equally also wants to take their place and have their own life. And she convinces in that film. So I think, again, we'll probably see her noted on a lot of lists too. I would like to see Danielle Deadwyler appear on more lists. Her role in The Piano Lesson, she did really well in embodying that sibling who perhaps is being dismissed and nobody's really listening to her. And there's that soulfulness and spirituality that comes through in the film as well. And she really embodies that and delivers just such a really good emotional performance as well. Yeah, so equally we're seeing again Emilia Perez actresses from that. Probably so Zoe's receiving a lot of nominations for her role within that. I think I've seen noted as well Adriana Paz. She was on the BAFTA long list for Emilia Perez, as well as Selena Gomez. So I don't know if we're again going to see a situation where there's more than one of those actresses nominated, perhaps even winning. So it's a very, very interesting race for that category. But also we have people like Felicity Jones in The Brutalist, and she has appeared in some categories for as a nominee, but I think unfortunately that may end up being a role that's overlooked, even though she is really the beating heart in The Brutalist and gives such a quiet, understated, but yet determined performance. So it would be good to see her recognised as future nominations, but it may be that she does just miss out from the top 5 in some of those. And I know as well Isabella Rossellini, for her role in Conclave, has been receiving some discussion. People have said, well, her speaking part is quite small, but it's impactful. when she comes onto that screen and she is there and delivers her performance. It is one that is felt, and I think it would be good to see her on list, but again, I think she may be someone that is overlooked. And also Ingenue, Elise, for her role in Nickel Boys. I think that again it's a role that's providing that warm support for the boys, but I think she might be overlooked, but it's a good one as well.
Chris and Darryl, Ariana Grande would be a good choice as a winner potentially for any of these shows, because she would bring in the huge Arianator audience.
Yep.
Plus she's she's not one of the older crowd, so I think from the PR point of view she would be a good choice. But then you've got Zoe Saldana, who is excellent in Emilia Perez. I personally think it's between the two of them. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I wouldn't personally argue with that. I mean, I have Emilia Perez as a whole piece. I do have issues in terms of trans representation, in falling into some tropes that we feel like they do feel quite outdated, if I'm being honest. But on the flip side, I do appreciate sort of the audacity of it, especially as a musical. So anything, especially in being an original piece as well. I think any excuse to sort of push that narrative. But I think I am leaning towards Ariana, to be quite honest. I think like Latoya was referring to, I think people have sort of been blindsided by the comedic timing. I mean, if you've watched her on various SNL skits, I think it's always been there, but I think to see it so refined here as a whole package with singing and and sort of the emotional depth that she ends up bringing to the role as well, in terms of being a foil for Cynthia Erivo, particularly the dance sequence, the contemporary bit that they have about halfway through. I mean, that is just stunning work from both of them. But I think, again, like you said, Rehna, I think as a whole package, I am leaning towards Ariana, to be honest. I can't really see her beyond her this year. And then, like I referred to earlier with Cynthia, I think maybe down the line, if part 2 really delivers the goods as well, and maybe it'll balance out for the both of them getting such recognition.
Yeah. Chris, any thoughts?
I did wonder if, because it's a part 1, that might hurt Ariana as well. I mean, obviously it could work in her favour, but I feel like when it's a genre film and there's multiple parts, like Lord of the Rings, the only none was Ian McKellen in the first film, and they didn't get any after that. So I was like, would it be, and Chalamet not getting any for June? I don't know, but it does look like it's between her and Zoe. I do feel like, because Isabella Rossellini, as Latoya mentioned, is getting so many nominations, if she's going to be this year's Jamie Lee Curtis, like someone who just comes and sweeps the season for a similar sized role, although I think her role in Conclave is much better than Jamie Lee Curtis's was in Everything Everywhere. And again, she's like very, career where she could easily have won for something like Blue Velvet or whatever earlier in her career. And she says, and obviously coming from her mum and family as well. She's kind of Hollywood royalty, so they could well end up giving it to her. I don't know.
Interesting. Now, Clotilde was going to be looking at Best Director, so again, we'll have a group discussion about that. I really don't know who really stands out in this group. I think Denis Villeneuve, obviously for Dune, but then he's got the remainder of the series coming. So I don't know whether it's going to be a Lord of the Rings situation. Wait till the final one. Brutalist, Corbett for the Brutalist, Bergen for Conclave, and I think they're probably the 3 main ones. So I don't know who wants to start on that. Chris, maybe you?
Yeah, I think the ones you mentioned absolutely, plus Sean Baker for Honora. I've seen a lot of people who've been pitting it purely against him, and is it Corbett or Corbet? Do you pronounce the T?
Corbett.
Okay, yeah, I'll say Bradley. Or Brady. It seems like those two early on have been like singled out as the 2 front runners. I wouldn't write off James Mangold for a complete unknown because, as you said earlier, Walk the Line did so well, and I think he got Oscar nominations for that. Um, and then I think Berger because All Quiet on the Western Front did so well, and his direction and this has come under a lot of praise as well. So he'll almost certainly make the list. It would be criminal if Villeneuve misses again, but he might well have more chances with June Messiah, I think, in a couple of years.
Yeah. Latoya?
Yeah, so I think it would be good to see that recognition for Villeneuve, for the technical brilliance of Dune Part 2, but also the emotional elements that comes through it. And it's such a visually stunning film. But I think, again, as Chris has mentioned, the fact that it is part of this trilogy, it may be that people don't view it as a complete film as yet. And so we'll make their full nominations and take a full view at the end of the series of 3 films. I think also another one who hasn't been mentioned as yet, Coralie Fagiet for The Substance. I think that would be quite good to see her receive some more nominations for that film, which has been receiving plaudits throughout, visuals, storyline, performances. I think it's a strong contender as well. I do think you'll definitely see Bradley Corbett for The Brutalist appearing in a lot of nominations as well. So I think those are probably the ones that I would see appearing at the top of the list.
Darryl, anyone stand out for you?
I think similar to what you've mentioned, really. I think this is more open-ended than I think there's more room for shocks this year with the director category. I think Coralie, like Latoya said, I would be, all in on that one personally. I think as a whole package, The Substance is superb, and I think again the body horror aspects, but just the whole direction of it, intertwined with the performances. I think for Coralie to get some recognition would be wonderful. Again, Denis, I think personally, I think it will get the Lord of the Rings treatment. I do think it will be later down the line, which I can understand, but I can appreciate for fans of the franchise. It would be quite frustrating, especially given the technical achievement of Part 2 in particular. I think as I say, it's a tricky one. I think Brady and Sean for Anora and The Brutalist. I think because of the subject matter and how well they handle them, I think they would be quite interesting choices for director this year if it's not necessarily going to go towards the obvious Denis Villeneuve route. If they sort of curveballs, I think either of those two would be great choices. But yeah, I think there's not many immediate names jumping out. Like I wouldn't be shocked, although I think the film's, it has its flaws. I wouldn't be surprised if they give like a legacy one to Ridley Scott for Gladiator 2. I wouldn't be shocked, but given the sheer scale of that thing, I would not be surprised. And sort of, the emphasis on, being a bit more practical instead of relying just on CGI. I think, and obviously the work rate that he's putting in, the age that Ridley Scott's at, I think they might recognise it. I wouldn't be surprised. Similar to Denzel, I think they're just sort of that legend slot that they do tend to reserve sometimes in certain categories. And I think Ridley might be a good chance of being one this year. But otherwise, I think it's as open a field as any category this year.
I think that's a really interesting point, Darryl, because Ridley Scott was, cited as a possible favourite to win this year. But then in The Gladiator really hasn't done very much in any of the other awards. So I'd love to see him win, but I don't know. Anyway, moving on to the big one. Chris, this is your category, Best Film.
This is a really, I feel, quite open-ended one as well. I feel like because the Oscars have 9 or 10 films, I think we were saying earlier. So I think you've got your strong locks would be something like Anora, The Brutalist, Wicked because of its box office and awards potential elsewhere. I feel like Emilia Perez. I'd love Nickel Boys to get a nom. I think it missed the BAFTA long list for Best Picture, so I'm not sure if we'll get an Oscar nom, but it would be thoroughly deserved because it's quite innovative in how it approaches the subject matter and its technical aspects. The whole point of view perspective throughout. Which on paper is quite challenging, but I think it pulls it off very well. Dune Part 2, I think, might miss director, but should get a picture nom at the Oscars. Same with the first one. And then Conclave would probably be in the mix. And I think the top three picks would probably be Anora, the Bruce Willis, and Conclave as maybe an outside bet, looking at how well All Quiet on the Western Front did, and maybe also appealing to the older Academy members because it's got, you know, quite an old cast and subject matter as well.
What I would say about Conclave is that, and this is something, Darryl, that I'm going to write in part 2 of my awards articles, is that the negative side of campaigning is that if there's something to be said about a film or an actor, that all comes out now. And we've already had it with Ariana Grande and her marital status when she took up with I've forgotten his name, but you know, her co-star. So that's been in the tabloids. And with Conclave, today I was reading about how it's anti-Catholic. So I had Conclave quite high up, but if that takes off, that negative anti-campaign, I could see that hurting it. I don't have a major favorite, but I think Wicked could possibly do it.
Another point was I'm a bit disappointed with the season as a whole that there's not more foreign language films in the mix for the top awards. Because previously, as obviously we had Parasite winning, Drive My Car was up for picture and one screenplay. I think the closest we might get this year is All We Imagine Is Light, which is the India's entry. But outside of that, I can't think of what else would be. The Seed of the Sacred Fig had some early buzz, but that seems to have kind of fallen off the radar a bit. And Wild Robot had some really strong festival buzz, and so people thought it might get in for picture early on, but I don't think that will happen now, sadly. But it is a really good film.
Darryl, any thoughts on best film?
I think Conclave is probably the safest choice of the lot. Just be given, you know, the ensemble, the prestige they all have as a collective. Again, factoring in Edward Berger's previous success with All Quiet on the Western Front, it does, and just because of what it deals with, particularly the final sort of twist of it, without giving anything away, I think it would stoke a lot of conversation, and whilst still feeling sort of like a safe choice, it would still feel somewhat progressive, given the subject matter. I'd personally love it to sort of throw a curveball and give it to Anora, if I'm just judging off what I've seen so far. There's other films that I've sort of, you know, personally I've responded more to, but again, they're not really even on the fringes. Like Queer immediately jumps out in the mind. I'm surprised Challengers hasn't had a little more. I know it might sound a bit controversial, given it seems a bit sort of low end in terms of story, but I think the performances, the score, Guadagnino's direction, I think either of those, I'm a bit surprised neither of those have had a bit more of a look in beyond, particularly in Queer's case, Daniel Craig. And then again, The Brutalist, you know, sort of tipped as this, you know, monumental American epic, while still feeling quite left field, just judging what I've sort of heard from you guys in terms of what it deals with narratively. I think that would be probably a close second, but again, I think like Chris alluded to, I think particularly best film and director, it could literally go any way at the moment, which at least for once in an awards season, it does feel quite interesting. And then factoring in the last couple of years of what the Oscars have plumped for in the big categories, I think there is room definitely for some shocks.
Latoya?
I think it would be good to see something that's a bit more left field, receiving a nomination. So it would be good if The Substance makes it onto some of those lists. I think we will certainly be seeing Wicked and The Brutalist, and probably, yes, Conclave, probably A Real Pain as well. But I would like to see The Substance coming on there. I think Anora is another one that we will probably see being nominated as well on quite a few lists. Again, we've got that really good performance in there from Nikki Madison, but you know, the subject matter itself may be something that's a bit more controversial for some viewers. So it may be in there in the top 10. Given how much traction it is garnered so far, but I think Wicked is going to be there towards the top of the list.
Great, thank you everybody. It's been a really fascinating discussion, and I hope we can do things like this again on behalf of Movie Marker, because there is so much to discuss. We only really touched the surface of some of the topics that we could have gone into. So thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, Darryl. Thank you, Latoya. And everybody have a wonderful January. Bye.
Thank
Thank you all,
you.
guys.
Okay, goodbye.